Here's an episode that, my goodness, it took me forever to get to, but I am so happy that I'm finally getting to it now. The 97th Academy Awards happened on Sunday, January 22nd. Conan O'Brien hosted. A movie called One Battle After Another won Best Picture. Jimmy Kimmel showed up and took shots at Donald Trump. That boy can't keep himself out of trouble to save his life, can he? At least one speaker referenced Palestine. The New York Times ran an opinion piece Monday morning after the ceremony from a German writer urging Oscar winners to use their platforms to denounce Trump as a mad king running a dictatorship, and comparing those who didn't to Nazi collaborators. Hours later, most of the people on that stage declined to take his advice. Ricky Gervais, who hosted the Golden Globes in 2020 and delivered what may be the most accurate description of Hollywood's self-importance ever spoken on a live awards broadcast, reposted his famous warning on Twitter. He said, "If you do win an award tonight, don't use it as a platform to make a political speech. You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world." He added 4 words to his repost. They're still not listening. He's right. They are still not listening. And the market is telling them something they can't hear because the sound of their own applause is too loud. In 1998, 55 million Americans watched the Oscars. This year, approximately 20 million tuned in. The movie industry sold 1.24 billion tickets in North America in 2019. In 2025, they sold 780 million. A 37% collapse. Warner Brothers, one of the oldest and most storied studios in the history of American cinema, is ending its existence as a standalone entity after more than 100 years. And the Best Picture winner this year bombed at the box office despite good reviews. Hollywood is not just out of touch, it's dying. And it's dying of its own choices.
Courage, compassion, faith, freedom, truth. Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to wake in America.
The 98th Oscars were, by the standards of recent years, relatively restrained in their political content. Conan O'Brien's hosting was described as mostly inoffensive. The political moments, Kimmel's Trump digs, the Palestine reference, the general atmospheric assumption shared by everyone on that stage that the audience agrees with their politics. They were present, but not dominant. The German writer, whose New York Times piece demanded open defiance and lamentations about dictatorship, was gravely disappointed. Bill Maher, not exactly a conservative voice, has said publicly that Democrats need to tell the celebrities to shut up because Hollywood is holding the party back. Even with the progressive cultural establishment, the awareness that the Oscars lecturing format is not working has begun to penetrate. But the restraint, such as it was, is not the story. The story is the structural condition of an industry that has spent years producing content its audience does not want to see. Lecturing the audience that does not want the content, watching the audience stop showing up, and responding to the audience's departure, not by examining what it's been producing, but by redoubling the lecture. That cycle is not a recent development. It's the logical endpoint of a decades-long process in which Hollywood's creative class became so ideological homogeneous, so socially insulated from the half of the country that votes differently than they do, and so convinced that their job is to educate rather than to entertain, that they lost the ability to make the kind of films that a broad American audience actually wants to pay money to see. The Best Picture winner this year, One Battle After Another, is the perfect case study. It carried, according to the reporting on this episode's source, a strong liberal message. It received good reviews from the critical establishment that shares the film's ideological commitments and regards its message as the appropriate content for serious cinema. And it bombed at the box office. The people who write the reviews loved it. The people who buy the tickets did not go to see it. The gap between critical acclaim and the audience response has been the defining feature of the Oscars season for years. And it's not a coincidence or a mystery. It's the market communicating a clear and consistent message that the industry refuses to receive. The 5 highest grossing films of all time, Avatar, Avengers Endgame, Avatar The Way of the Water, Titanic, and Star Wars The Force Awakens, share a characteristic that the Oscar Best Picture winners of recent years do not. They're entertaining. They're exciting. They tell stories that engage audiences across political and demographic lines. Even the James Cameron films, which contain thematic content that Cameron himself would describe in progressive terms, work as entertainment because the messaging is embedded in the story and spectacle rather than delivered as lecture. Cameron is moved to New Zealand because he dislikes Donald Trump and the American political climate. His movies still work because he understands at the craft level that audiences come to the cinema to be transported, not to be instructed. The Academy that gave Best Picture to a film that bombed at the box office has forgotten that distinction entirely. The New York Times opinion piece published the morning after the Oscars by German writer Daniel Kellman deserves extended examination because it's the most concentrated expression of the worldview that is killing Hollywood. And it contains within it every element of the progressive cultural establishment's self-understanding that the rest of the country finds so insufferable. Kellman's argument was that Hollywood stars have a duty to use the Oscar platform to denounce Donald Trump because they are known around the world, even in places like North Korea. And because the United States, under Trump, is becoming a dictatorship run by a mad king. These people, I swear. He invoked the 1930s and the German actors who collaborated with the Nazi regime, implying that celebrities who do not use their platform to attack Trump are collaborators with an equivalent evil. I'm sorry I'm laughing. These people are so stupid. He was disappointed that last year's ceremony featured only muted attacks on the administration rather than open defiance. He wanted more. There is a great deal to examine in that argument. But start with the most obvious thing. A German writer lecturing American celebrities about their obligation to denounce American democracy as a dictatorship, invoking Nazi Germany as the relevant historical comparison. Published in the New York Times the morning of America's most prominent cultural awards ceremony. The columnist makes a specific error that is worth naming. He writes that Ricky Gervais was wrong to tell Oscar winners they are in no position to lecture the public. Kelman's counter-argument is that their global fame creates a platform that confers a duty to speak. And that argument confuses fame with authority, platform with wisdom, and the ability to reach an audience with any legitimate claim to instruct that audience. A movie star who has spent their career performing other people's words in controlled environments, who lives behind gates in a neighborhood where the consequences of open borders and failing schools and rising crime are invisible, who has grown wealthy in a capitalist system they affect to despise, has no special claim to political authority derived from their fame. Their opinion about whether Donald Trump is a mad king running a dictatorship is worth exactly what any other American's opinion is worth. One vote, one voice, no more. The Oscar stage doesn't confer expertise. It confers a microphone. Those are not the same thing. Kelman cannot say the same thing about his home country. As the column's critic correctly notes, in Germany, people can be arrested or jailed for spreading malicious gossip or reposting false claims online. The country Kelman is holding up as a model of resistance to the American dictatorship he imagines is a country where the government regulates speech more aggressively than any American administration has ever opposed. The irony is apparently invisible to him, and the New York Times, which would publish a column comparing Trump supporters to Nazi collaborators without apparent hesitation, ran this piece on Oscar morning as the appropriate frame for evaluating American celebrity political expression. That editorial choice tells you as much about the Times as Kelman's column tells you about Hollywood. 55 million Americans watched the Oscars in 1998. 20 million watched this year. That's not a streaming migration story or a technology disruption story, though both of those factors are real. It is an audience rejection story. The people who stopped watching the Oscars did not stop watching because they found a better award show somewhere else. They stopped watching because the show stopped being for them. Half of America voted for Donald Trump in 2024. Half of America lives outside the coastal metropolitan areas where Hollywood's creative class is concentrated. Half of America attends church, reads the Bible, owns firearms, sends children to schools they are increasingly unhappy with, and watches their communities bear the consequences of the policy choices that Jimmy Kimmel and the cohort he represents celebrate from the Oscars stage. That half of America is not an audience that Hollywood has lost through bad luck or changing tastes. It's an audience that Hollywood has actively alienated through consistent, unapologetic contempt for its values, its politics, its faith, and its judgment. The NBC poll cited in reporting on this episode found that the film industry has lower approval ratings than the NRA. The NRA, an organization that the leftists spend decades demonizing as the primary obstacle to common sense gun control. The avatar of American gun culture's resistance to civilized regulation is more popular with the American public than the motion picture industry. That finding is remarkable, and it's not close. It reflects a public judgment about which institution more faithfully serves the interests and reflects the values of ordinary Americans. And the judgment is not favorable to Hollywood. The Sony Pictures CEO, whose op-ed ran the day before the Oscars, laid out the industry's challenges honestly. A 37% ticket sales decline, the end of Warner Brothers as a standalone entity, the threat of AI to the production model, the disruption of streaming to the theatrical release window. These are real structural challenges. What he did not address, as the columnist notes, is the content problem. The consistent production of films that the critical establishment loves and the ticket-buying public ignores. The systematic narrowing of Hollywood's creative output toward the ideological preferences of an industry that's lost touch with the audience it depends on for survival. The highest-grossing films are not accidents. They are the market's verdict on what storytelling looks like when it's designed to transport and entertain rather than to instruct and correct. Avatar works because James Cameron understands that spectacle and emotion are universal human experiences that transcend political division. Avengers works because the superhero mythology of good versus evil, of ordinary people discovering extraordinary capacity for sacrifice and courage, speaks to something in the human soul that doesn't require a progressive framework to access. The films that bomb are not victims of bad marketing or insufficient promotion budgets. They are the casualties of an industry that has confused its own ideological commitments with universal human values and can't understand why the audience keeps not showing up. This show has spent many episodes documenting the institutional capture of American education. The school curricula, the university appointments, the counselor's office conversations, the teacher training programs that have been converted from the transmission of knowledge to the ideological formation of the next generation. Hollywood's version of the same story is less coercive. Nobody is required to buy a movie ticket or watch the Oscars. But it's no less deliberate and no less connected to the broader cultural project that this show has been mapping. The progressive project requires control of the culture because culture shapes how people understand themselves, their country, their obligations, and their possibilities. A culture that tells stories about heroic soldiers, faithful families, divine providence, national pride, and The hard-won wisdom of tradition produces people who understand themselves within those frameworks. A culture that tells stories about systemic oppression, institutional corruption, the futility of faith, the toxicity of traditional masculinity, and the urgent need to dismantle the inherited order produces people who understand themselves within those frameworks instead. Hollywood has been in the business of the second kind of storytelling for decades, and the consequences of that storytelling are visible in the cultural landscape this show documents every week. The German writer who wanted celebrities to denounce Trump as a mad king and compare his supporters to Nazi collaborators is not a fringe voice in the Hollywood creative community. He is articulating the consensus worldview of the industry, the assumption shared across the studio system, the award circuit, the critical establishment, and the talent agencies that America, under conservative governance, is moving toward fascism. That resistance to that governance is a moral duty, and that the entertainment industry's platform is appropriately deployed in service of that resistance. That consensus is why one battle after another won Best Picture despite bombing at the box office. The Academy that votes for Best Picture is the same ideological community that produced the film. It's rewarding itself. Bill Maher, who is not a conservative and has spent his career attacking religion and traditional values, has told Democrats that celebrities need to shut up because Hollywood is holding the party back. Ricky Gervais has said they're still not listening. These are not conservative critics observing from outside the cultural establishment. They are people inside that establishment who can see clearly that the lecturing is counterproductive, that the audience has delivered its verdict, and that the industry's response to that verdict, more lectures, more political content, more Jimmy Kimmel, more German writers in the Times, is accelerating the departure of the audience rather than winning it back. The audience that is left is not coming back on Hollywood's terms. It's not going to be shamed or guilted or Kelmaned back into the theater to watch another movie that the Academy loves and the public ignores. It's going to keep watching the films that entertain it and ignore the ones that lecture it. And the market is going to keep delivering the verdict it's been delivering for years. We will pay for stories that respect us, and we will not pay to be told that our values are the problem. That's not a political statement. It's a consumer preference. And it's as American as anything that's ever come out of Hollywood, back when Hollywood understood what it was for. 20 million people watched the Oscars this year. 55 million watched in 1998. One battle after another won Best Picture and bombed at the box office. Jimmy Kimmel took shots at the president. A German writer in the New York Times called for celebrities to denounce America as a dictatorship and compared those who didn't to Nazi collaborators. Ricky Gervais said they're still not listening. And you know what? He's right. Hollywood is free to make whatever movies it wants to make. That freedom is one of the things that makes America worth defending. The freedom to produce art that fails on its own terms. To lecture an audience that has stopped showing up to run an award show for a shrinking population of ideological fellow travelers while the rest of the country finds something else to watch. Nobody is taking that freedom away. What nobody can give Hollywood is an audience it has not earned. The 37% ticket sales decline is not Trump's fault. The Warner Brothers disillusion is not the NRA's fault. The Best Picture winner bombing at the box office is not the result of insufficient marketing. It's the result of an industry that confused its political commitments with its creative purpose and has been paying the price ever since. The American audience that Hollywood lost is watching something else. It's reading something. It's listening to something. It's building its own culture outside the institutions that have decided it's the problem to be corrected rather than the audience to be served. This show is part of that. The independent media, the faith-based storytelling, the podcasts, platforms, and creators who have decided to tell stories that respect their audience rather than instruct it. These are the alternatives that the market is funding because the market goes where it's respected. Hollywood can come back. It can make movies that entertain rather than lecture, that trust its audience rather than condescend to it, that tells stories with the craft and ambition that once made the American film industry the most powerful cultural force in the world. It can do all of that. The question is whether the people running it are capable of the humility required to admit that their audience is not the problem. The answer so far is no. Stand with us, support the mission, refuse the silence. Find us at titdusa.com and the Stand Against the Silence campaign. I'll see you next time.